Hey, everybody. We're just waiting for a few more people to come in and drop in. So glad you're all here. Welcome to my webinar. I don't know. I don't like using the term webinar. My live call on the problem with privilege in the coaching industry and what we can do about it. My goal really is to just address problems, address things that I have seen in the coaching industry over the last 5+ years. And because I really do believe that if we approach this with, with open eyes, approach problems with open eyes, um, I really do believe that shining light on shadows can bring consciousness to something. And with consciousness on shadows, it can dissolve shadows. And so, with that being said, with the problems that I have potentially seen in the coaching industry, um, I think talking about it with, where we're acknowledging what's there with an eye on where we're going, what we want to create with respect to this community as far as safety is concerned, I think a lot can happen. I think we can go a long way. And so we're going to get rolling. And I have a slideshow, but I almost feel like maintaining as much of a discussion as possible could be great too. So I'm going to pop in and out from slides back to me. But what we'll do is we'll just dive in and I'll share with you what my plan is so that you know what to expect during the call. And we'll just go from there. And as if I'm talking, if you have any questions that you're going to want answered at the end of the call, just start putting them in now. And if you have questions as I'm explaining anything or talking about anything, go ahead and put them in now. I want to make sure that you get your questions answered. And my goal is to leave enough time at the end of the call for a spill the tea respectfully portion that will be off the record, just because I also think there's something to be said for being willing to, discuss this stuff in an open, communicative way where not everything is recorded. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen. Just know too, during this webinar, pay attention to yourself as you're listening. And if you notice any resistance in your body, if you notice any resistance or tightness, make sure that you're so kind and gentle to yourself. The goal is to be curious with yourself and really loving and compassionate, because a lot of us inherited our privilege. And so we don't need to blame ourselves for that. I think it can just be really powerful to acknowledge that it's there. So if you're here on this call, like, make sure you celebrate that too. And if you notice some slight activation, go ahead and just check in with yourself and if you have any little exercises you can do to help yourself calm down. You can do some butterfly tapping. You can, just check with your body, see how you're carrying yourself, sit back a little. You can tap your knees, tap your feet. You can focus on your peripheral vision. And if you need more ideas, go ahead and ask in the question and answer channel. Okay. So this call might be for you if you like helping people, or maybe this call's for you because you have kind of been privy to, or maybe perhaps you've witnessed people that have been harmed in the coaching industry. You've seen certain coaching practices, even if they were taught as best practices, hurt people, right? Or maybe you've been potentially harmed. Maybe you have come out of coaching programs feeling like, whoa, what the crap just happened? Like, why was I not feeling safe with that coach or anything like that? And so maybe this is a call for you. And if that's the case, then my hope for you is that you'll come away feeling really validated, like, oh, that makes sense. There wasn't something wrong with me. Okay. You might be here because there's more for you to understand about these systems to better support yourself, your clients, and your business. Okay. So, what we're going to talk about again is we're going to talk about privilege bubbles. So, this is just some stuff I'm going to teach you guys. We're going to talk about privilege bubbles, what they are, inherent hierarchies, unconscious superiority, and the illusion of linearity, and how that can affect us without us even knowing as clients and also as coaches in the coaching industry. And just learning about this is already going to do so much for how you are running your business or how you treat yourself or see yourself with respect to the way you're living or your life or carrying yourself. So we're going to learn about those. And we're also going to just talk about like things we can do to kind of counter some of these problems that are happening, right? So, easily implementable strategies around what to do instead. You're going to come away feeling more validated and seen. And tomorrow you'll receive a free privilege and oppression workbook that's going to help you kind of dial into your own intersectionality point with respect to, privilege and oppression.
And also know more about how to support your clientele and minimize or eliminate harm. Okay. I really like to embody this goal of like, do no harm, right? And I know we can't put a stake on someone else's safety, but there's so much we can do with coaches to set up an environment that's incredibly conducive to safety and healing and things like that. And so to me, safety is at the crux of everything. And even though we can't create safety for someone else, we really can. There's a lot that we can do on our end that I go deeper on in my certification programs to really support to create fertile grounds for that for our clients. So it's easier for them to lean into it. Okay. All right. So, yes. And then also just you'll see how adding a trauma informed lens, I'm going to just talk to you briefly at the end about how it can support your relationship with yourself and others, your confidence as a coach, um, your healing growth results that your clients get, but and also in turn your bottom line. Okay. And then again, like I said, the spill the tea respectfully portion of the call where you can ask anything you want. And you can start asking right now if you want, and then we'll make sure that we address it at the end of the call. Okay. And sometimes those go kind of long and sometimes they don't. And so we'll just see what happens today with whatever questions you guys have. All right. And again, my promise today is that you'll just walk away from this call knowing more how to support yourself as a business owner, as a coach, as a human, and how to validate your lived experience, especially if you've been negatively affected by, some of these coaching practices in the coaching industry today, or, um, yeah, basically that. Okay. What I see too is like with a lot of a lot of the challenges today around starting our own business is just a lot of noise. Like we see a lot of stuff and we kind of live up here in our heads. We're very conditioned and socialized as women to like live up here. And so a lot of the work that I do with my clients is really to help them kind of get out of here and get in here, right? Like start living from their body, living from their soul and making decisions from their intuition. And what often needs to come first is that nervous system safety and things like that. And a big reason why I'm doing this call today, because it's not the most comfortable thing to talk about, but it's just something that I've seen enough happening over the years in the coaching industry where I don't think, when we talk about best practices or practices that are doing harm, I don't think I haven't seen a lot of coaches address this too much. Or maybe I haven't seen like a lot of white coaches doing really well be willing to address this topic. And so I will just say, like, even though as I decided what to talk about today, and it just dropped in so clearly. As I was finalizing everything before the call today, it feels a little like, I don't know, I'm a little nervous talking about some of the stuff because these are observations I've made based on, people that I've seen, people I know, people I love, but also in the name of people who don't feel seen or don't feel validated and are self gaslighting and self blaming because they can't get it right, like these other coaches. I want to make sure that we're a voice for that too. We provide a voice for more people, and that's why another reason why I think bringing a trauma informed lens into your coaching practice it will help you be so much more inclusive of the spectrum of the whole. Okay. All right. So the first thing I'm going to speak to with respect to that is, we're going to speak about privilege levels, inherent hierarchies. Actually, I'm going to share my screen and then I'll stop the share. So with respect to what we're speaking to today, we're going to have a little section like a phase one where we speak to privilege bubbles, inherent hierarchies, unconscious superiority, and the illusion of linearity, and how much I see this in the coaching industry today, and then and what that means, and then again these strategies, but also what we can do instead. Okay. So this is kind of like where we'll go. And, with each one that I talk about, I'll talk about a strategy, something that we can do instead. And then we'll speak to how having a trauma informed lens and a lens of, understanding systems of patriarchy, systems of oppression and privilege, how that can also really be a benefit for you as you develop out your coaching practice. And that's why in my certifications, I have like a module set on feminism and things like that because context matters and understanding having words to put to your lived experience matters. And as coaches, helping people and teaching people what that, providing language so that they can pick and choose what their lived experiences can be really, really helpful. Okay. So when I speak to privilege and privilege bubbles, one thing that I like to think about is almost like this is the picture that comes to my mind when I think of what has kind of happened when we don't have a trauma informed lens with respect to the coaching industry. If we were like a bell curve, if there's like a bell curve of coaches, I think what happens is I think what happens sometimes is a coach in a place of position or in a position of privilege or power figures out a way to do the thing, right? So they figure out a way to make this much money or get to this space or something like this. Okay. And here's their route. Their route was was this. Okay. And then once they figure that out, they might say something like, well, I don't want to get into all of it, but basically kind of offering this truth that their how is the how for everybody else without recognizing that so much more is going on and humans are are so unique, right? And so what happens is this person makes it work and they've got their way that they did it, their how, but then from their space of privilege and not recognizing, not having a trauma informed lens, not understanding intersectionality and marginalization and things like that, basically saying, like, well, if I can do it this way, then humanity can do it this way. Okay. And what happens sometimes is coaches or other, aspiring coaches or other people, um, you know, I think probably have a lot of women on this call. So we might think what happens sometimes, and I'll speak to this in a little bit too, is we might unconsciously kind of put them in a one up position. And we're like, okay, so she did it this way. Let's do it this way so that we can have this result. But the thing is she's not you and you're not her. Okay. And her level of privilege, and it's not even like a level, it's more of an intersectional point of privilege, is different than yours. Okay. And so it's possible that, you know, out of the spectrum of humanity, there might be a share of coaches that can take this, try this route and actually get amazing results too. Okay. But then if this share of coaches do this and get these results too, and then they start touting the same thing as this coach, that it's this way and that it's not this way or this way or this way, we all think that it needs to be this way. And when we can't do it that way, we like self blame, we self gaslight, and things like that. And so, in my eyes, being trauma informed is a way to really speak and teach in a way where we're opening up, speaking and teaching and using diction and qualifiers and language where we open up this truth that, like, yes, everyone can get this, but it might look different. It might not look like going all in, right? Like when I first certified as a coach, there was a little bit of an energy of like, prove you're all in, prove you're all in by quitting your job and just going all in. And I saw so many people, and it just sucked because maybe for these people, they were able to because they may have had enough buffers and things in place, like a husband or a partner that were working and making plenty of money. Maybe they had enough in place so that they could do that and it could work while they kept their nervous system regular and maintained because they always knew they had that. But if we don't speak to that and then we say, you can do it, just go all in and prove it like I did, then what's happening is there are other coaches trying, quitting their jobs or trying to do it that way. And then they would just freeze up. Their nervous system would freak out. And it made so much sense because they were all in different intersectionality points. Okay. So by level of privilege, I don't mean higher or lower, just intersectional points. And so I was so grateful for some of the coaches that, I was working with at the time or just interacting with at the time where they really brought in this importance and focus on safety and nervous system stuff. Right. And I was also grateful that that I didn't do that. Right. I had a really good job as an accountant and it was it was part-time and things like that. Um, But I will say there was a part of me that was like, oh yeah, maybe I'm not brave enough to do it that way. But then I started seeing the fallout of that and realized like, oh, okay, like maybe this is fine. And that's just one example of a best practice or something that was taught to do it this way, where again, if we don't qualify our language or understand that everybody's at different spaces and everyone is privileged and oppressed in a different spot, then certain language that does work for some just doesn't work for all. And then as women, a lot of us are socialized and conditioned to self blame. And so if we think this is the path and we can't figure it out with some people's specified path, then we just kind of turn a lot of that inward and then just can and spiral too. And so if this has happened to you in some way, whether it was kind of that all in idea or something else, just want you to know like I see you, I hear you, and you're amazing right where you are. Okay. And so with this, I'm going to speak to a term. I mean, I don't know. You could Google it. Maybe someone's already like talked about it. But what I'm going to speak to is just this idea of privilege bubble. Okay. And with privilege bubbles, there's two main points that I'm going to speak to. And one is your experience isn't my experience, so it's less valid. And the second is people benefiting from the system failing to see the clear vulnerability points or things that might not work for everybody. Okay. And so again, like this idea of your experience isn't my experience, so it's less valid or it might not be true. It's something that I see a lot, especially because I grew up in a high demand religion. And so in the privilege bubble that I grew up in, I grew up in a pretty solid privilege bubble. It was in a hub of conservative Christianity. And because of the bubble, it was hard to see outside of the bubble, right? Because all of my reference points were other people inside this specific, upper middle class privilege bubble. And, thankfully I had a dad who grew up in a different state, different privilege bubble. And so in our family, he was able to meld his with my mom's, of course. And then I was able to see a little bit beyond where a lot of my friends saw. But I grew up in an area where it was like looked down on to feed homeless people. And luckily, that's not how my dad rolled. But I remember in my circles of friends, if someone saw me give money to a homeless person, they would like tell me I was doing something wrong. And I remember like having to hide that part of me because I wanted to fit in or whatever. And so even though I feel like I was raised in a way to see a little bit beyond it, it doesn't mean I wasn't immune to hearing phrases like, well, that's not how I see it. Well, I know a lot of people and they don't see it that way. And that's kind of something that I hear a lot, especially as an adult. It's like when people start sharing their lived experience, their truth, and then we say, well, I see it differently. um, I know a lot of people and they don't see it that way. It can just be really discounting and dismissive. And I think it can do harm, right? There's this comic that I saw that I saw today. It was a comic of it showed these two eagles and they were like reading the paper together. And one eagle said to the other eagle, the eagle was like, do you think owls are predators? And the other eagle looked up, thought and was like, no. And then the first owl that asked the question was like, "Yeah, I thought so too." And then it showed another comic thing, and that owl was like, "I don't know what that mouse was complaining about." And then the other owl was just like, "Yeah, hey." And so I think like that tries it home so much. Certain things can be triggering to some that aren't to others. And just because they're not triggering to you doesn't mean they aren't to others. And so just really trusting that like your fishbowl is different than someone else's. And, as we develop more understanding of humanity and people and soul and people's souls and other people's lived experiences, we can do so much more to help create an environment that's supportive and safe for a lot of people. Okay. And so, yes, we all grew up in our own cultural fishbowls, no matter where they are. And until you recognize that there are other colors, other shades, it can feel like there is just your way. But again, jumping bowls or just connecting with people in other bowls and listening can do so much to dissolve that problem. Okay. I see certain parts of the coaching industry are kind of set up to be inherently privileged, right? And I think part of it is just because I think the pendulum is kind of shifting back to more accessible coaching for people. I think it kind of swung over to like being pretty high end, expensive for a lot of people, at least, in some of the circles that I was in. I do think the pendulum is swinging back. But with that, I still think aspects of the coaching industry are inherently privileged because, insurance doesn't cover things like that. And so it's almost like we have paying clientele who have enough money to pay for this. Okay. And so it's almost some certain aspects or programs or things like that might have members that have a certain level of privilege. And so again, like if we just think prove you're all in by cashing in your 401k when you're 90 years old, not and I don't want to presume that's like the wrong thing to do because all humans are resourceful and worthy and whole. So it's not about knowing those things, but also like just paying attention to, you know, people's nervous systems are in different spaces. Everyone's in different spaces. And so um, I think the big solution to these privilege bubbles that I'm speaking to is just to listen. If we want to learn more about humanity, if we want to learn about, different groups that are more marginalized, especially if you identify as a white, Christian, heteronormative human, um, when it comes to problems like systemic racism and different things like that, let's just try listening. Okay. And that's the advice that a lot of Black people offer is like, please just listen. Please try to say, like, oh, that's not all white people. Like, what if we just listen? So that's actually my simple solution or strategy for that. But I think just being aware of privilege bubbles and that we all probably live in a certain privilege bubble and getting kind of clear on what that might look like for you and maybe where some blind privilege has been in the past, it'll go so far with helping you and your clients and things like that. Okay. Now, another thing with respect to privilege bubbles, this is a sticky thing that I was kind of nervous to speak to. And it does feel it feels a little tougher to say this, but also I think it's important to say and speak to. And what I will say is oftentimes when there is a system of oppression in place in a business or something like that, and you're benefiting from it financially, it may make it harder to see with clear eyes what's happening, kind of like a form of denial. And I see this all the time in abusive marriages because of my old niche. But so I see it all the time in abusive marriages, and it happens when employees, if they know they have to have a job, working for a certain company to survive or feed their kids, they're going to put up with a lot more, and they're going to like kind of turn the other way to a lot more crap if that's what they feel like they need for survival. And so yes, I have so much compassion for people doing things for a reason. I'm not even speaking about certain people or businesses or things like that. But also, I just have seen it so much that sometimes not benefiting financially from a system of oppression or like an abusive father or things like that, when you no longer need that financial benefit, it can help you see the picture a little bit more clearly. Okay. So sometimes um, and I think this can get kind of murky and messy in the coaching industry because we know people who have found ways to benefit from that system. Okay. And we like, know, and trust those people. We want to trust that what they say is true and that it actually is their thoughts. And what I have seen over the years is like people coming out of certain businesses who have absolutely been harmed, absolutely been treated horribly. And then when they try to talk to their peers about it, who are still benefiting from a business, the peers push back. Like, well, that's not how I see it. Well, no, I don't think that person meant that, or things like that. But when when harm is happening, that's just not what people need to hear because their lived experience is going to be different and their lens is going to be different. And so I think that's kind of just something to keep in mind. Like, if we're benefiting from a system via blind privilege or other survival systems or trauma responses in play, and we found a way to benefit from the system, it doesn't mean that that stuff isn't happening, right? If you think of an abusive marriage, or I would say even in high demand religions, right? There are inequities there. In my opinion, in the religion that I grew up in, there are inequities there, clear, blatant inequities, right? That doesn't mean that other women and men don't figure out how to work that system, right? Use their privilege or use their intellect or survival responses to figure out the system and end up like on top. Okay. They can figure that out. But just because they do doesn't mean those other harmful things aren't happening. Okay. And so I'm just saying, I see that in religion, I see that in marriages, and I see that in businesses too. Okay. And so another thing, just benefiting from these systems, I think as coaches, because especially if we are coaches and we're running practices and we fit into like a white heteronormative category, let's just be open to blind privilege, right? Like what things do other people have to about know that we don't even have to think about? And like the tiniest example is like I live in France and I always have my pulse on what time it is everywhere in America. Like I always know. And I always know what time it is here and I always know what time it is there. And it's so common. And I don't really care that people don't know what time it is over here in Europe, but it's almost like because most of the coaching industry is, a lot of it is based in the United States. And I talk to people and it's not just coaching industry, it's my friends too. Um, it's just like, what day is it? Like, who, what? Is it 12 hours ahead? Is it yesterday? Is it tomorrow? And it's a tiny example, but it's just one of those things where like, when you hear Black people talk about how they have to know more about systems of oppression with respect to white people, they have to know more about their own race, but they have to know almost more about ours too. And it's just stuff we don't even have to pay attention to. It's that blind privilege that we might not always see. And so it could just be good to open up to that. Like, yeah, where else are my blind spots? And how can I learn a little bit more about that? Okay. Because the bottom line is that when our friends and colleagues aren't up to date on privilege and then they're defending problems, and we trust their friends, maybe even unconsciously put them into one up positions because of their status or the money that they're earning. What do? We self gaslight, we turn inward, we self blame. Okay. And I've seen so many coaches come to me who have been harmed by other coaching programs or by other coaches directly. And when really they were treated in a way that weren't deserving them. Okay. So again, listen, believe your clients, believe people and what they say, believe that their story is theirs. Let them decide what thoughts to loosen up and when. Okay. Because it's not just a thought. Sometimes it goes deeper than that. And so they're not always ready to give up a thought that might go deeper than just a thought. Okay. Oh, I need to speed it up here so we have time for our spill the tea. Okay. All right. The next thing is inherent hierarchies. Okay. So again, a lot of times based on our socialization, especially because most of us are women, I'm going to speak to this, but don't worry, men, like this applies to you too in a lot of different ways. It might just look a little bit different. Like, how are we creating hierarchies from top down and from bottom up? What happens sometimes is like, there's a hierarchy for looking down. And one common phrase that I heard a lot was like, you're the expert, right? And it's such a little thing. But like when we're in a position of power and then we call ourselves like we're the expert, and then we, set everything up so that like we're the expert and you need me, right? Are we believing that our clients are whole, resourceful, and worthy? And are we helping them trust in themselves or helping them think you need me to get the results that you want? And so it's just a little tweak. But again, it supports that inherent hierarchy thing where we might not even be realizing it, but we can kind of unconsciously put someone up on a little pedestal by saying that. And so it's not a huge thing, but it's just something to kind of consider or think about, right? Like, I'm the person you need, or I'm a person for you, right? And you can, and again, it might even be more the energy behind how you say it than that actual word, but it's just something that I noticed. Okay. And so with unconscious hierarchies, there's like a top-down approach where we might think because of our degrees, our certificates, our accolades, our status, how we identify in those ways. There's like that top down approach where we might think like we elevate ourselves above, others, above our clients, right? But then there's this other unconscious hierarchy thing that I want to address, and it's more of that bottom up approach. Okay. So for you, you could just check in with yourself. Like, where am I putting someone in a one up position and why? Am I putting people who make more money in a one up position, people with more degrees in a one up? Am I putting people with more certifications or letters behind their name in a one up? Am I putting people who look the part in a one up position, or who are male, who are older than a certain age or younger than a certain age, right? 'Cause these are a lot of these are like unconscious biases that we might have, but also we can use them against ourselves by putting people in one up positions unconsciously when we're actually all equals. Okay. And so just pay attention to what comes up to you. Like, where am I doing that? Where am I putting people in one up positions for some reason? And, what about me? What do I know? Okay. And so if you've grown up in a society where there is a fair amount of privilege, which probably if you are white and if you are a woman and you live in the United States and you have paid for a coaching certification, you probably fit within that paradigm. And that's why, even for me as that person, I think it's important to speak to. And the reason that I think it's important to speak to is I'm not going to get this perfectly right, but back in like the 70s or 80s, when it was illegal for women to practice homosexuality, like men had basically there was a period where men had more rights with respect to practicing homosexuality than women. Okay. And it's, we know, if you know anything about, privilege and oppression and these different intersectionality points, men generally benefit from a system of patriarchy more than women. Okay. That's just how it is. I'm not saying that men aren't also oppressed in some way, but they generally benefit more from the system. And so whenever this was the case, these men who had benefited from the system due to their privilege point, guess who went to bat for the women? The men. Okay. Because of their position of power, homosexual men who could kind of pass as straight, that's what this article said or wherever I saw it, they went to the Senate and they went and argued for the rights of these women. And that's how women were able to start being themselves without being punished. And so for us, as white, if you are a white heteronormative woman, I think it is up to us to speak to this and make sure that we're opening up our eyes and to be aware of these problems with privilege, even if it's within our little privilege bubble coaching industry. Okay. So we talked about privilege bubbles, inherent hierarchies. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to go a little quicker through unconscious superiority. I feel like with the unconscious superiority, I see it stemming a lot from patriarchal structures in the Western world, especially like religious. And the reason I say religious is because even though Western world has kind of maybe moved forward a little bit from it, it seems like high demand religions seem to cling to some of this unconscious superiority. And so a side effect of the puritanical teachings that were happening when the United States of America was founded, there was a lot of like an us versus them mentality going on. Okay. So discounting someone because they don't think, walk, talk, act, look, or behave like you and your peers, right? Discounting someone because of their degrees or lack thereof, religious affiliation or gender or things like that. Okay. Um, and so if you grew up in a high demand religion, there is a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of teaching around us versus them, us knowing more than them. And when that gets modeled, we internalize that too. Okay. So for you, just check in. Where did I learn this? If I did learn this, is it true? Do I want it to continue to be true? How is this idea of me knowing more or me being better in some way? How is that harming me or people that I know? And what do I know? Okay. So just kind of check in. I see that superiority and entitlement come through a lot for with people who have come through high demand religions. Okay. The next thing I want to speak to, and I'm going to go through it fast just because of the time and I want to make sure there's time to answer questions. But with the illusion of linearity, it's kind of what I was speaking to here, right? Like a lot of us have been taught about this linear checkbox life and the accolades that come with it, when that's not really how it plays out for a lot of people. And I know so many people, my husband and myself included, who did the linear thing. He got the doctoral degree. I got my master's in accounting. I went and got my CPA. I worked for the big four. I did all the things. And I thought it just kind of guaranteed like a sweet, easy breezy life, but it didn't. Right. And so again, in these systems of privilege, when we're, in these privileged circles and we share like, yeah, it can be this way. We're all in such different spaces and we're all married to different people and we all have different parents and we all have different inherited trauma and transgenerational trauma and different environmental things that we have internalized, even if we share the same degree. It's different. And so just kind of releasing that illusion of linearity and knowing that like, but not promising it to your clients. And as a coach, what I like to really do is I do think foundations, especially if you've been running coaching practices for a while, you probably see patterns, right? Lots of patterns with clients. And so I keep my eyes on patterns, but I don't lock into this like order that things need to happen. So as a coach in your coaching practice, just something to kind of be mindful of, like I like to make sure that there's a base, a supportive base, but I also like to be open to fluidity too. So allowing for ebbs and flows, right? Foundations are good. And the fluidity is what brings, in my opinion, richness to a lot of healing and a coach client relationship. Okay. And then, just speaking to how, being trauma informed can really support you in your relationship with others is really just like I'm just going to speak to this really briefly and then save time for questions. But really, like your relationship with others with yourself and others is so different as you understand trauma because I feel like the trauma informed lens, the trauma informed mindset that I teach my clients, it is flowy and it works around you and your gifts and your strengths and your unique connection to self, right? And as you learn how to connect to your body safely, because it's not one way, not just through thoughts, people connect through emotions, people connect through images, people connect through movement, people connect through senses. There's so many different ways. And so with a trauma informed lens, you can meet your client where they're at with respect to connecting to themselves and allow for that fluidity with the structure as well. Okay. And of course, like as you self apply and integrate these tools, you're going to more readily and organically see how it applies in others. And that's why in all my programs, we're applying and not just consuming. Okay. Because a lot of times the consuming just keeps us up here and it doesn't keep us in here accessing our knowing. Okay. Um, You'll also see how your lived experience is, and you'll be able to honor the hell out of it. Okay. So much so that you would advocate for others to be seen and validated in theirs. Okay. Um, how else will this help your relationship? You're going to see people and love them as they are and have so much less of an agenda for how they do the things that they do. Okay. And yeah, it'll shake up relationships, but also in the best way. Um, People who are obsessed with their deeper selves and, and like, if you can kind of become that with yourself, like people are magnetized towards that, right? So I think that can be really, really helpful. And again, more confidence as a coach because with this lens, you know how to meet a broader spectrum where they're at and not just think that this is the way. And if you don't do it, what's wrong with your thoughts and what are you doing wrong? Okay. Um, and again, let's make sure that when people are coming to us on consult, we're using a trauma informed lens to create a really, really safe environment, right? We don't use people's pain points and vulnerabilities as a way to get them to need you or to hire you, right? I'm not going to stick something in that wound and make it more painful so that they think, oh, she's the only one that can take that out when we put it in the first place. Okay. With a trauma informed lens, I think you run your practice with more ease. And in ways where you support your clients in ways where we're providing so much more than band-aid solutions. And you can run a practice based on your intuitive genius. Okay. So your branding, your modality, knowing fully well that only you can put into the world what you want to do. Okay. With a trauma informed lens, you know how to run calls. You know when to focus on mindset versus that somatic side of the spectrum, or of course, some blend. And I think the big thing too is just releasing that hold of linearity. Okay. And again, the healing growth results your clients get in turn, they do enhance your bottom line. And I will say this comes with repeat clients. Okay. This comes with repeat clients, this comes with referrals and things like that. And that's kind of what I've seen a lot with my practice over the years is, the referrals that come in because we're able to show clients hold space for their clients that they have maybe have never experienced in their entire lives. And it's really, really sacred ground. And I take it really seriously. And I do have a vision of everyone being trauma informed because I think it just supports this more inclusive approach that meeting more people where they're at. Okay. So with that, let's answer questions, shall we? Let's see. I actually think, okay. So we're going to enter the spill the tea portion of the call. This means you can ask anything you want. I'm going to turn off the, um, the recording and then we can just get any questions answered that we want. And then what I'll say too is if any of you have not yet done my certification, my advanced certification for, if you haven't done my advanced certification for people who want to become trauma informed, there will be an email sent to you after the call with a link to learn more and sign up if it feels like it's a fit for you. I have a cohort starting in a few weeks and I cannot wait. And I have a hybrid version set up for people making there are plenty of people making multiple six figures who do the advanced certification, but some people want like a little more one-on-one, like they want to do the processing one-on-one with me instead of in groups. And so I have a hybrid version set up for that. Okay.